Unprepared, he actually named his price. Upon hearing the vampire's request, Klein felt both irritated and amused. He looked at the Bishop Otravsky, who was standing in front of him, and asked, "Father, may I borrow your candle? The one that you used last time. I've forgotten what it's called." Before Bishop Otravsky could reply, the vampire in the basement spoke in a stunned voice. "What do you want to do? What do you want to do?" At this moment, Bishop Otravsky answered warmly, "It's called the mental terror candle." "What are you borrowing it for?" "Father, you're very cooperative. You even knew to ask." The corners of Klein's mouth curled up. He planned to use it to directly inquire the deepest part of this friend's heart. "As you know, I'm quite talented in this area, and I'm very good at such matters." Before he could finish his sentence, the vampire in the basement had already shouted, "Bastard, give up on your idea. You will be cursed if you do this to a noble sanguine." Hey. I'll speak. I'll speak. I'll tell you the origins of the master key." Klein immediately chuckled. "Thank you for your cooperation. HMPH. A friend of that dirty old man naturally isn't a good person. As a sanguine, all I did was go to the hospital to steal blood bottles to drink. Why did I end up locked up in here and forced to listen to this naggy, housefly-like Bible of life?" The vampire in the basement angrily complained. "Frankly speaking, if you really are who you claim to be, and you bumped into me at most, I would give you a warning. Unfortunately, you got lost and entered this cathedral. The priest you encountered used to kill people wantonly and enjoyed combat, but he's now pious and repentant. You can only blame your poor luck, however. With Bishop Otravsky's recovery, he's unlikely to hurt you. At most, he will keep you to his side," Klein silently responded. The vampire in the basement paused for a few seconds and said, "About a month ago, I went to the hospital in Southborough to steal blood and ended up meeting a thief. He originally wanted to enter the hospital's finance department, but he ended up lost. He opened the door to the blood bank and ended up being caught by me. He was using that master key. He told me that he had found it back when he had burgled a particular house. He had also obtained a pocket watch with inlaid diamond. In the basement. At first, he thought that the key would correspond to a room or safe. He made several attempts and found that the key could open all doors. This is no doubt an unimaginable surprise for a thief. After that, he enjoyed numerous successes until I caught him and confiscated his key. Damn, I didn't expect that the key would make one get lost back then. It matches the scene I saw with my divination, however. Is there a curse on the master key? The previous owner was detained because he got lost, and the owner before that was caught red-handed because he got lost. Perhaps I should really throw it into the space above the gray fog and take it out when I need it. But that will be a lot more troublesome and might cause delays to certain matters." Klein controlled his expression and asked unhurriedly, "Did the thief say where he stole it?" The vampire in the basement mumbled, "Are you doubting my intelligence? How could I not ask about this? He said it was in the area south of the bridge, 48 River Bay Avenue. I was planning to check it out when, damn it. All right, I'm done answering. Don't disturb me anymore." Klein didn't leave just because he received an answer. Instead, he slowly took out a halfpence copper coin and recited softly, "He's lying." After repeating it 7 times, Klein's eyes turned dark, and he flicked the coin up. He watched it spin in the air before it landed in the palm of his hand. It was heads, indicating a positive response. In other words, the vampire was lying. The thief's description coincides greatly with what I had seen through divination, so they confirm each other. The vampire must have lied about the exact address. Klein looked at Bishop Otravsky and said with a chuckle, "He lied. Let me think about the reason why he lied. TT would be very unwise of him to vent his anger and seek revenge on me, who is completely uninvolved. It would also be very detrimental to his situation. So I think he's actually using this method to call for help. That address might very well belong to a companion of his. Father, do you plan on paying a visit?" The basement suddenly fell silent. After a few seconds, the vampire laughed and said, "I just didn't want to tell you that easily. You threatened me just now, so I lied to take revenge on you. Isn't that normal? I can hear how forceful you are at trying to calm yourself down." Klein smiled and said, "Then, what's the real answer? If you continue lying, I don't mind sending this address to the 3 churches. I'll just say that it has something to do with the recent serial murder." Humans are really vicious. The vampire sighed through gritted teeth. "The area south of the bridge, 32 Verde Street. Klein tossed the coin again and got the result that the vampire wasn't lying. It seems like vampires don't have the ability to interfere with divination. I should confirm it above the gray fog when I'm back. Klein pressed his hand to his chest, faced the heavy stone door and bowed. Thank you for your cooperation. HMPH, the vampire in the basement snappily replied. As Klein turned to leave, the vampire suddenly shouted, Remember that my name is Lynn White. Remember my name is Lynn White. Why do I have to remember your name? It's not like I'm going to save you. Without preparation, and without a home-ground advantage, I'm no match for Father Otravsky, and he has the mystical item to transfuse blood. Could it be that this vampire's companion will offer a bounty, and he wishes for me to sell this information? Klein was surprised for a moment before he walked out of the Harvest Church without a word. After finding a secluded place, he undid the spirit pendulum wound around his left wrist and started to divine if he should visit 32 Verde Street at that very moment. The answer he got was that there was some danger, but it wasn't too high. There is certain danger, where's the danger? What kind of danger would it be? Klein carefully analyzed the situation, suspecting that the apprentice who died from losing control had turned into a ghost-type monster due to its intense grievance. Furthermore, it was a relatively strong one at that. That's not right. That thief clearly came out with the master key without encountering any trouble. Could it be that the danger is in another secret location in the house? Klein thought for a moment and decided that it would be best for him to go only when he was sufficiently prepared. It prevented him from entering a situation in which he encountered an enemy whom he was unable to deal with his present Beyonder powers. At the very least, I'll have to wait until I buy bullets that can purify Wraith's shadows. He nodded slightly. After this consideration, combined with his previous battle with Dawn Paladin Bishop Otravsky, Klein suddenly felt that he could vaguely conclude the first rule of a magician: never perform unprepared. Doing otherwise would result in a high chance of messing up, Klein added silently. On Tuesday morning, after preparing butter and toasting 2 slices of bread, Klein was in no hurry to eat. He opened the door and retrieved the day's newspaper from the mailbox. There's a letter. He pulled the letter out from the newspaper and glanced at the envelope as he returned to the dining room. It's from Stuart. It appears that he has already completed his preliminary investigation. Klein nodded slightly, tore open the envelope, shook the piece of paper, and sat down at the dining table as he read it. Stuart claimed that the 2 suspects had shown no signs of abnormal behavior. One of them entrenched himself at the grocery store and guarded his wife and children, living a lifeless life, while the other was busy with various temporary jobs and working hard to maintain his life. They were not irritable, nor did they have the urge to fight. They also didn't lock themselves up in a room. At the end of the letter, Stuart lamented the harsh situation in East Borough and vowed to save enough money to avoid being reduced to staying there when he was old. Thank you for your help. I will share my findings with the rest of you if there are any other clues. Klein replied to the letter simply when he saw how Stuart had no signs of being discovered. He didn't want Stuart to delve deeper into the case, or else the devil might detect the danger and kill any latent dangers in advance. Putting away his pen and paper, Klein picked up a piece of bread that had already been soaked in butter and leisurely spent his breakfast with a cup of black tea and the newspaper. During this process, he felt rather regretful that there were no signs that the Beyonder gathering organized by old Mr. Eye of Wisdom would be held. The existence of this devil has seriously affected the lives of the Backland Beyonder. I hope Mr. Isengard Stanton is able to notice my hint and be fruitful. Yes, he should be a recognized Beyonder by the officials. Klein put down the newspaper and picked up a napkin to wipe his mouth before he packed up to leave. His plan today had been already decided last week. He was to visit the Royal Museum for the Emperor Roselle Memorial Exhibition. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Count Hall. Audrey was wearing a light lace dress and donned snow-white fur as she waited for her personal maidservant, Anne, to help her put on a soft hat with pearls and a thin fishnet veil. Beside her, Susie sat there with a bow tied around her neck. My beautiful little princess, where do you plan on going? Count Hall asked, stroking his fine mustache as he descended the stairs. Audrey's eyes replied with bright eyes, Father, I plan to attend the Roselle Memorial Exhibition. I can take a look at the original diary of Emperor Roselle and find a chance to get some from Mr. Fool, she added in her mind. Count Hall muttered to himself, Why are you going today? There will be a lot of people, and the scene will be very chaotic. Yes, I'll get someone to coordinate with the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. After the official exhibition is over, they'll open its doors specially for you and your friends for half a day. That way, you can have a quiet and undisturbed tour. If you have anything you wish to look at closely, you can discuss it with them directly. In that the case, that seems even better. I can directly look through the diaries in this exhibition. Audrey lifted her skirt and curtsied. Thank you, handsome Count Hall Tilda. Exhibition West Borough, 2 Kings Avenue, Royal Museum. Although it wasn't a weekend, there was a long line at the door when Klein arrived. According to the descriptions in the newspapers and magazines, he knew that the world's middle class had fewer ways of entertaining themselves. Other than reading newspapers, reading novels, listening to opera concerts, playing tennis and squash, enjoying plays and holding or attending banquets, there were only 3 options: going to a park, going to an exhibition, and going on vacation. Due to Emperor Rosel's influence, annual vacations were already common phenomena. At 9 o'clock sharp, Klein, who was wearing a silk top hat, a black cane, and a long double-breasted frock coat, followed the people in front of him and entered the museum. There was a split here, and the different guides led a number of visitors down different passages. Klein and nearly 20 people followed a good-looking woman and listened to her introduction of Rosel's life. This was of zero value to Klein, who was half a historian, so he was so bored that he began confirming the location of his wallet. Since his wealth had soared to £952, just a step away from £1,000, his wallet could no longer hold so much cash, and he could only carry some of it selectively. As for the rest, Klein didn't feel at ease to just leave them at home without protection, so he threw them all above the gray fog. As they walked, they entered the first exhibition hall. A female guide excitedly said, "Ladies and gentlemen, these are the daily necessities of Emperor Rosel. Look, that's his velvet quilt, and that's the golden glassware he used to drink his wine. That's the toilet he used, the first toilet in the modern sense. Even a toilet he had used before is being exhibited." Klein suddenly felt some sympathy for Rosel. Then he looked at the toilet with a flushing system behind the glass wall and saw that it was shimmering with golden light. It seemed to have a layer of gold foil on its surface, and it was engraved with an exaggerated and artistic pattern. How extravagant! Klein no longer sympathized with Rosel. Separated from the toilet by only a glass layer was Rosel's everyday clothing, including cuffs, a shirt with pleats at the collar, and so on. It was obvious that the female guide was rather impressed by Inti's dress culture. After the Daily Necessities exhibition hall, there was a display of the original versions of the important documents which Rosel had issued, including the Civil Code and other extremely valuable historical relics. At that moment, the female guide pointed at a display cabinet and said, "This is one of the diaries left behind by Emperor Rosel. It uses his self-created mysterious symbols that have yet to be deciphered to date. Many historians and archaeologists believe that these notes contain the least known secrets of Emperor Rosel. As a romantic, I have my own guesses. Perhaps these are the symbols he had agreed upon with his most beloved woman. They wrote about each other, but were never able to truly be together." "You're suited for writing novels." The corner of Klein's mouth twitched. His eyes then turned to the notebook that was spread open in the display cabinet. On it were the simplified Chinese he was extremely familiar with. 6th March. Damn it, I'm almost constipated from eating the food here. 17th March. Are the ladies of Inti so open? Did I hit on her, or did she hit on me? I just find it odd. 22nd March. It's time to choose a religion. On one side is the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun, and on the other is the Church of Craftsmanship. My choice is without a doubt. Praise you, God of all machinery. One day, I will make the Church of Craftsmanship change its name to the Church of Machinery. It's indeed very romantic constipation. This should be a diary entry written by Emperor Rosel in his early day. It's without any valuable information. His handwriting is even uglier than mine. Klein looked away and tusked. Of course, he only saw the 2 pages that were spread open. He didn't know what else was on it. I wonder how the security measures here are. I wonder if there is a chance of sneaking in and flipping through them. Klein looked around and saw that there were quite a few security personnel on the surface. Perhaps there are bayonders from the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. He muttered under his breath and followed the female guide as he blended in with the crowd. He entered the next exhibition hall, which was called The Gentle Rosel. This is Emperor Rosel's first love letter. This is his first love poem he created, When You Are Old. The female guide looked at the manuscript in the display cabinet with glimmering eyes. Shameless. Yeats' coffin can't be held shut any longer. Klein couldn't help but lampoon. This is a bracelet he made. This is the original manuscript of his novel. The female guide introduced with a tone of extraordinary adoration. Klein tried hard not to let his expression change. Of course, he also believed that Emperor Roselle, who was an artisan in his Beyonder profession, was definitely very skilled in his craftsmanship. This is the basic education textbook that he improved to educate his children. Each word has its own corresponding picture. It was a little game he had invented for his children, similar to Inti's chess, but somehow it didn't become popular. These are the toy blocks he invented. These were also for his children. The female guide said in a gentle tone without even realizing. Isn't this fucking Chinese chess? Furthermore, Lego wants to collect the licensing fees from you. Klein could only smirk to hide his other emotion. With a single glance, he noticed that there was a woman over 1.7 meters tall standing in front of this display cabinet. The lady had chestnut hair that fell to her waist, and she had a perfectly proportioned figure. She was neither fat nor thin. She wore a lace dress which had the vibes of a young girl, but she wore a black, out-of-fashion bonnet and a fishnet veil hung down, concealing her face. She stood in front of the display cabinet and stared at the items inside for a long time without leaving. Even when Klein and the others followed the guide to the next exhibition hall, she remained rooted to the spot. After passing through a few more exhibition halls, the female guide pointed ahead and said, "The next thing you will see is Emperor Roselle's restored study. Of course, it's only a part of it." As she spoke, Klein and the others entered the exhibition hall as the area before them opened up. It was almost like a library, lined with shelves which were 2 stories high. There were ladders sitting beneath them and aisles between them, leading to a 3-dimensional book park. You can imagine how the owner of this place had once climbed up and down the ladder in search of the book that he wanted to read. The guide painted a vivid picture. No, Roselle would definitely send his servants to seek it out for him. He wouldn't do it himself, Klein silently refuted. In the center of the row of bookshelves were desks, chairs, brass lampstands, and the like. They were all protected under the cover of glass and were blocked from making contact with the outside world. With a single glance, Klein found a stack of manuscripts which were all yellow in color. The stack of manuscripts weren't spread out, so one could only see the contents of the first page. It was a drawing of a rectangular object with a detailed description. This is a portable, miniaturized application of the telegraph. Through it, one can connect to the person holding the same item and receive and exchange information. You can even converse with them directly. This requires better positioning. I think we can boldly cast our sights to the sky. There are no obstructions in the sky, and it would allow for better transmission of signal. Emperor, you aren't even letting go of a cell phone. Klein couldn't help but facepalm. At that moment, the guide introduced the stack of manuscripts. These record the wonderful ideas of Emperor Roselle. They record invention, which he was unable to turn into reality in time. They record the glory of what our human civilization is capable of. Klein didn't pay any attention to the flattery, and instead casually sized up the other thing. Suddenly, he noticed a bookmark in a hardcover book on the desk. The exposed part of the bookmark depicted a drawing which was randomly drawn by a child. Emperor Roselle isn't good at drawing. Just as Klein was mocking inwardly, he suddenly thought of something. Roselle had once disguised a card of blasphemy as a bookmark and placed it inside a certain book. Could it be this one? Klein carefully observed for a few seconds, but he didn't find anything amiss. That's right. He had mentioned before that the cards of blasphemy possess anti-divination and anti-prophecy characteristics. Under normal circumstances, there's no way to discover their uniqueness. If it were so easily recognized, the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery would have long taken it away. Klein cast his gaze away and began scrutinizing the other books. He discovered that many of them had a bookmark in them, and all of these bookmarks were of different shapes. He pondered for a moment, and using his clown's ability to control his facial muscles, he curiously asked, "Are these all books that Emperor Roselle has read before?" "Sorry, are these the original books?" The female guide nodded firmly. "Yes, these are all the items from Emperor Roselle's study from back. They include, but are not limited to, books, manuscripts, bookmarks, lampstands, ink bottles, but even more were destroyed during the several conflicts." Klein nodded slightly and studied the bookmarks again. Roselle had said in his diary that he was going to put the card of blasphemy in a very valuable book, so that no one would ever think that the most valuable thing in that book was actually an obscure bookmark. Well, which of these books are valuable? Klein began eliminating books as he recalled the details written in the diary. Glorious Era doesn't look like it. The History of the Intis Kingdom doesn't look like it. Geography of the Northern Continent, this might be possible, but it isn't very likely. The Improved Principles of Steam Machinery, just like before. Klein scanned the books one by one when his eyes suddenly came to rest on the first pile of manuscripts he saw. They were recording objects from Earth objects, which Roselle had wanted to invent but lacked the conditions to do so. There was also a bookmark in it, and on it there was a depiction of Roselle in royal emperor clothes. His manuscripts of plagiarism. No, his manuscript of creativity should be considered a very valuable book. Could that bookmark be a card of blasphemy? Klein's heart skipped a beat, lightly tapped his molars, and quietly activated his spirit vision. However, he didn't find anything abnormal. He then scanned the other bookmarks and obtained the same answer. That's right, if it's that easy to detect it, it wouldn't have remained till this day for me to have this thought. Klein deactivated his spirit vision, and once again, he thought via method of elimination, based on the details he had learned from Roselle's diary and the personality the emperor had shown. As far as he could tell, since Roselle had said that the book with the card of blasphemy was valuable, it couldn't be too ordinary, or it wouldn't satisfy his sense of warped humor. To use lots of valuable knowledge to serve as a foil for an unobtrusive bookmark would be a form of teasing the recipient of the book. Thus, books with value but aren't of great value can be ignored. In that case, Klein looked around, trying to make sense of it, completely turning a deaf ear to what the guide was saying. In summary, in the entire study, the only book that fulfills these conditions is that manuscript of creativity. The others are only ordinary in value. With Roselle's personality, he definitely wouldn't choose them. Yes, Roselle is the kind of person who would claim, "I'll hide the secret in the most obvious place, but none of you can find it." As Klein imagined this, he added a cackling expression to the emperor in his mind. Of course, there's no way he could confirm that the bookmark was the disguised card of blasphemy, because the books Roselle had, which were of great value, clearly included those in the field of mysticism. And those books were definitely not going to be put on display by the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. Yes, I have to first confirm if it's the card of blasphemy before considering if I should take action. Unfortunately, I can't use the date 20th January as a method of elimination. No one knows which bookmark is placed into which book on and on which day. Klein silently muttered to himself and turned to look towards the guy. He asked with a smile, "Do the books on the shelf also have things stuffed in between them? For example, a note written by some noble lady to Roselle?" This question made many men give a knowing chuckle. The female guide shook her head and said, "No, there aren't any. The books that contain other items have all been taken out and placed here for everyone to see. This is just a restoration of Emperor Roselle's study, not the restoration of a particular point in time. There is no need to maintain an immutable state." Klein laughed and said immediately, "I understand this sure is disappointing. That's simply great. There's only one bookmark in the entire exhibition hall that requires verification. The difficulty has greatly fallen," he added happily in his heart. As the guide introduced Roselle's favorite books, Klein looked around the room again, taking in the overall layout. Restored the room from more than a century ago, there were no gas lamps around the room. The lighting mainly relied on the iron-barred oriel windows that were a few meters away, and the huge crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. As for the brass lamp on the desk, there were no candles installed. It was purely a decoration. Looking out the oriel window, Klein saw the yellow, withered lawn and a straight iron-black lamppost. He took note of the location and turned his attention back to the book the female guide was introducing. In his mind, he began to analyze the feasibility of the theft. There's one premise. According to Roselle's intentions, the various churches and the ancient royal families wouldn't wish for him to spread the cards of blasphemy and destroy the stable order that has been in place for more than 1,000 years. Therefore, if I'm an archbishop in charge of handling this matter, I will directly burn all of Roselle's items. If the cards of blasphemy can be destroyed so completely, the outcome will perfectly suit the thoughts of the deity. If the cards of blasphemy are difficult to be destroyed, they will definitely expose their abnormality after the burning. Since Roselle's items still remain, That means that he used certain methods to make everyone, including the deities, believe that he had sent out all the cards of blasphemy without keeping a single one. Of course, I can't eliminate the possibility that some churches or ancient families might attempt to use the cards of blasphemy to make up for their incomplete Beyonder pathway. But this possibility is very tiny. This is because it will give Roselle an opportunity to come up with a united front strategy. There wouldn't be a need for him to go so far as to destroy the order by spreading the cards of blasphemy. In that case, his diary will show a certain level of confidence and corresponding concern, and he definitely wouldn't be left with pessimism to the point of only thinking of relying on that ancient secret organization. Furthermore, it's been more than 100 years. The Church of the God of Steam and Machinery, who has retained these remains, must have made numerous supplementary searches. Therefore, no one would believe that the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery remain hidden in here. In other words, the security level of this exhibition wouldn't be too high. Besides, the most important point is that Backland is currently under siege by the terror caused by the devil's serial murder. The Beyonders of the three churches must be sweeping through the entire city. The amount of manpower that the Machinery Hivemind squad can afford to place at this unimportant exhibition would be extremely limited. Yes, the thing most worthy of protection here is Roselle's diary. Many wild Beyonders worship the Emperor greatly. They believe that the book written with independently created symbols must contain more profound mystery. There's a motive to stealing them, and they have the ability to do so. Therefore, the guard's focus will definitely be in that exhibition hall. I'll do a divination above the gray fog when I'm back to verify my analysis. However, I have to first test if it's a card of blasphemy. Otherwise, I would be taking a certain risk and wasting tremendous effort only to steal an ordinary bookmark. If that happened, I might as well lie back in my grave. Yes, how should I verify it? It can't wait till I infiltrate again, and I don't have an opportunity to do so now. I have to find someone to help. I have to be careful. Kleins followed behind the guide with a focused expression, as though he was very attentive. Miss Magician is an apprentice. She's able to go through walls and doors. It's like she possesses a master key, so she's a good candidate. However, she's only sequence 9. The mission of infiltrating to do the verification is way too dangerous for her, Miss Zia. No, she wouldn't be up to this. Let her get a thief to help. No, that won't do. There are Beyonder guards here. The thief would most likely get caught on the spot, which will expose the fact that someone is looking into Roselle's bookmark, Miss Sharon. She's powerful enough, and her state is suitable for this kind of quest. But the problem is that the card of blasphemy is a divine object that can make most Beyonders willing to kill. I still don't trust her enough, Klein thought, analyzing the helpers he could use. Gradually, he had a candidate in mind, Miss Justice. Is it possible for her to use her wealth and power as a noble to touch the bookmark, using her interest as an excuse? There are plenty of opportunities. Furthermore, this method won't alarm anyone. It would be beneficial for me to sneak in and steal it in the future. The more Klein thought about it, the more he found it feasible. As for the question of how to verify it, as the card of blasphemy possessed anti-divination and anti-prophecy characteristics, the only solution he could think of for the time being was to attempt to destroy the bookmark. Doesn't anti-divination and anti-prophecy mean that using a similar method on a particular object that hides a card of blasphemy would result in failure or interference? Wouldn't that be tantamount to exposing itself? What it really means is that even with the card of blasphemy, divining it will be equivalent to divining an ordinary object. The divination would result in something equivalent to the ordinary object. In any case, I can't figure out what password the Emperor set. I can only use such a simple and crude method to confirm it. If the card of blasphemy can really be destroyed, then it only means that I'm temporarily unfaded with it. Yes, with the Emperor's liking, perhaps I can try an activation incantation. He once joked in his diary, saying, "My fortune is yours for the taking, but you'll have to find it first." I left everything I own at the ends of the fog sea, and the card of blasphemy is one of those treasures. The activation incantation could be set to 1 piece in Ancient Hermit. That's not right. That way, there would be no one who can obtain anything, unless a second transmigrator appears. This isn't in accordance with the Emperor's intention to create chaos and destroy order, so the corresponding word for Pirate King was in either Hermes or Ancient Hermit. Klein slowly confirmed his thoughts, paying more and more attention to the layout of the exhibition hall. Under the guidance of the female guide, They left the restored study and entered another exhibition hall. When everything was over and he was free to move around, Klein said, a little embarrassed, "Excuse me, but I would like to know where the washroom is." "Upstairs." "No, that's where our office is. If you follow this path until the end before turning left, you will see it." The female guide politely pointed in a direction. Using this opportunity, Klein figured out the connections of the washroom and several large exhibition halls, and he sketched out a rough layout in his mind. At noon, he left the Royal Museum without doing anything and returned to 15 Mince Street. Klein had originally wanted to instruct Miss Justice as the fool, saying that his adorer needed help. But on second thought, he felt that it would ruin the image of Mr. Fool. As an unfathomable figure, he has to appear calm and collected. He can't always be helping his adorer. At the very least, he can't be personally bringing up such matters, time and time again. Klein thought for a moment and quickly worked out a solution. He decided to pass on the image and voice of his adorers, plead directly to Miss Justice. In the process, Mr. Fool didn't say anything. Phew. Klein exhaled, drew the curtains, rubbed his cheeks, and began to pray to himself. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Pray for your help. Hope that someone can help me touch the bookmark in Roselle's manuscript of creativity. Help me inflict small and unnoticeable damage to it, and tell me of its results. While doing so, one can recite the corresponding term for Pirate King in Hermes or Ancient Hermes. No matter who helps me, even if there isn't a reaction, I will be willing to pay them £500. This can be deducted from the £5,000 that has not yet been paid. If there is a reaction, I am willing to give more. After doing all of this, Klein waited for a moment before entering the gray fog, and he saw the scene of his prayer displayed on the screen of light. After divining that the theft of the bookmark in the Royal Museum involved a certain amount of danger but wasn't too high, he extracted the plea and added more of a mosaic effect to it. He also distorted his voice slightly, and he threw it into the illusory star that symbolized Miss Justice. Adventure in Empressborough, the opulent villa of Count Hall. Audrey was supposed to be practicing her piano at this time, but she remained seated in front of her dressing table, thinking about how to read and memorize Roselle's diary in the evening. Suddenly, her surroundings became hazy, and a boundless grayish-white began to emanate. In the middle of the gray fog, the fool's figure sat high above. He was listening to a man who was barely visible pray, "I pray for your help. Hope that someone can help me touch the bookmark in Roselle's manuscript of creativity. How does Mr. Fool know that I'll be visiting the Roselle Memorial Exhibition this evening after the museum is closed, and that I'll have the opportunity of touching some items?" Audrey listened in a daze. Although she was amazed, she didn't find it odd. With Mr. Fool's stature and abilities, being aware of such a trivial matter is very easy. As for how he learned of it, there was no need for ordinary Bayonders to attempt to comprehend it. Audrey was about to reply when the fool spoke in a low, flat voice. "You can choose to accept this request or not." Audrey pondered for 2 seconds and said, "Respected Mr. Fool, I can try, but I can't guarantee success." She wasn't really interested in the minimum reward of £500. The reason why she had accepted the mission was that she was curious about the special nature of the bookmark left behind by Emperor Roselle, which was so important to the adorer of Mr. Fool that he offered an uncapped price. Anyway, I was going to look through Roselle's diary today, so it's convenient, Audrey thought. Amidst the fog, the fool nodded slightly and replied with a single word, "Okay." When the illusion was completely gone, Audrey turned her gaze to the dressing mirror and seemed to examine herself closely. Feeling both nervous and excited, she began to make plans for the evening operation. I cannot let them notice anything unusual. Even if Mr. Fool's adorer does take any action later, I cannot become a suspect. It's definitely not okay to only touch that bookmark. The moment it's lost, all eyes will be focused on me. Yes, so I need to show equal interest in all the other objects. I cannot let others notice that my main goal is that bookmark. The entire process has to be fluid, nothing sudden, and it has to be reasonable and logical. How should I cause inconspicuous damage? It's just a bookmark. Audrey's eyes swept across the items on her dressing table without focus. Suddenly, her gaze fell on an open jewelry box and focused on a pair of gemstone earrings adorned with fine needles. The corners of her lips curled up bit by bit as her eyebrows and eyes slightly curved as she muttered to herself, "With Susie's help, it should be enough." It was 6 o'clock in the evening. Backland, that hardly ever saw the sun during the current season, was already dark, and the gas lamps were lit up. After the Royal Museum sent off the last batch of ordinary visitors, it received a group of visitors composed of the young lady from a count family, the child of a duke, and a young viscount. As the machinery hive mind knew that some of the aristocratic children were foppish people who frequently caused trouble, the captain of the machinery hive mind's West Borough squad, Max Livermore, was responsible for guarding the memorial. He had no choice but to disguise himself as a security guard and stay close by to prevent any accident. His hair was neatly combed as he wore a monocle, making his scholarly appearance akin to a college professor. The monocle was actually a sealed artifact, codename 31328, named Eye of Crystal. With it, Max Livermore could see the spiritual body directly, as well as ghosts and shadows. There was no need to fear Beyonders, who used these usually difficult-to-detect entities to cause chaos or engage in theft. Of course, this sealed artifact also had a significant disadvantage. It could easily attract monsters like wraiths and shadows to the vicinity. If it was worn for a long time, one's vision would suffer irreversible damage. In the gloom of Backland, she's like the bright sun. At that moment, Max was looking admiringly at the blonde girl with blue eyes to his side. Audrey looked with great interest at the toilet, which was gold-plated and engraved with intricate patterns. She asked the guide beside her, "Is this the first toilet in the modern sense?" "Yes, I personally believe that this is one of Roselle's most outstanding contributions to human civilization. The sewer works that go with it have changed the phenomenon of filth being all over the streets of Trier." The guide originally wanted to say the word feces, but after looking at the girl in front of him, he felt that he couldn't lose his elegance. Audrey hesitated and asked, "Can I touch it? Can it still be used normally?" Viscount Glaint asked with a laugh from the side. "Why are you so curious about this? No matter how old it is, it's ultimately still a toilet." The other aristocratic children, who were on good terms with them, all laughed. "No, Glaint, you don't understand. This is the glory of human civilization." Audrey smiled faintly in response, but barfed inwardly. "If it wasn't to fulfill the request of Mr. Fool's adorer, I wouldn't want to do this either," she sighed helplessly. The guide chimed in, "What Miss Hall said is very right. The glory of human civilization isn't only reflected in firearms and other weapons that have changed the form of war, but they also shine in every detail of our lives. My lady, I don't know if it can still be used properly, because no one will use it." The guide glanced at Max Livermore and, after receiving a nod of confirmation, continued, "You can touch it, and you may even open the water tank to take a look at the mechanical structure inside. But please be careful." "Thank you." Audrey watched as the security guard opened the glass wall. She hurriedly took 2 steps forward, reached out her right hand, which was covered in white fishnet gloves, and carefully touched the flush button. Then she slowly stepped back and said with a smile, "All right, let's keep it at that. I've satisfied my curiosity. I can't hurt it any further." She constantly reminded herself that her prescribed character was that of a naive and curious young girl. After reading this, they entered the exhibition hall where Roselle's diary was located. After some introduction, Audrey asked again, "Can I look through this notebook? We are all interested in these strange symbols." I heard that paper would suffer damage by mere contact with air after a certain period of time, let alone having them touched. It shouldn't be possible, right?" She blinked, making her beautiful gem-like eyes express sincerity and desire, together with a little disappointment. The guide looked at Max Livermore again and waited for his reply before smiling. The church used a special storage method to make the paper look the same as if it was produced only a few years ago. Furthermore, even without this method, we will try our best to fulfill your requests. However, we may need to change environments, change our clothes, and go through a stricter process. You can flip it, but not for too long. Don't use too much strength." Audrey's eyes lit up all of a sudden, making it hard for anyone to shift their gaze away. After sincerely thanking the guide, she, Viscount Glaint, and the other mysticism enthusiasts had the glass cover removed as they carefully flipped through the notebook. Audrey tried her best to memorize, but due to the complexity of the symbols, her ability to remember them in this short period of time was rather limited. That should be around 2 pages of content. I wonder if there's any way to make a copy of it. Her thoughts wandered as she gave her spot to her peer. In this way, she made a request for a closer look at something in each of the exhibition halls, which was mostly met. After a while, they arrived at the restored study. Audrey kept to her previous behavior and would ask a few questions from time to time, fully displaying her curiosity. When the guide introduced the manuscript of creativity, her eyes lit up and she said, "Can I flip through it? I wish to see what the manuscript of the great inventor, Roselle, looks like. I also want to know what wonderful ideas it contains." "No problem, beautiful Miss Hall, Honorable Viscount Glaint. You can all have a look through it. If any of you are a devout believer of the church, you can even apply for a copy," the guide replied, according to Max's gesture. As a believer of the goddess, Audrey could only respond with a faint smile. It wasn't convenient for her to make a comment. At the same time, she pretended to lift her hair and touched her right ear with her palm, quietly removing her earring. Immediately, when the glass case that encased the desk was opened, Audrey stepped forward and, holding down the manuscript, casually pulled out the bookmark, before casually flipping a page. At this moment, Susie, who had received her hint, suddenly barked in a particular direction. "Woof! Woof! Woof!" The crowd's attention was immediately attracted in that direction. Audrey lowered her arm and used the earring in her palm to stab at the bookmark she was holding. While doing so, she chanted the phrase Pirate King in her mind, using Hermes before switching to Ancient Hermes. When the sharp, needle-like accessory touched the surface of the bookmark, Audrey suddenly felt an intense and illusory resistance just as it was about to penetrate the bookmark. An unusual resistance. The resistance disappeared in a flash. The fine needle punctured a tiny hole and nearly pierced through. There really is a reaction. There's really something strange about it. The light in Audrey's eyes glinted. Without daring to try again, she lifted her hand and placed the bookmark on the desk. Then she looked at Susie and calmly told her maidservant Annie, "Take her to the bathroom." "Yes, m'lady." Annie hurriedly led Susie out of the room. Ting! Taking this opportunity, Audrey threw the earring in her hand onto the ground. Then she tilted her head and said, "I'm sorry, I dropped my earring." Another maid hurried over, picked up the earring, and helped her put it on. The interlude went by in a flash, and everyone's attention returned to the manuscript. After they were pretty much done with it, they saw the security guard, Max Livermore, quickly tuck the bookmark in and close the glass cover again. Audrey's interest remained as strong as before in the next few exhibition halls. Just like before, she didn't show any abnormality. It was only when she left the museum and returned home did she find a chance to recite the honorific name of the fool and report the results. "Did what your adorer requested, and I damaged that bookmark a little. It had an abnormal reaction." An abnormal reaction. From the looks of it, it really is a card of blasphemy. Above the gray fog, Klein, who received the reply, was delighted at first, but he then exclaimed in surprise, "Isn't Miss Justice way too efficient? I only entrusted the mission to her this afternoon, and she has already completed the verification by the evening. Furthermore, this is obviously past the closing time of the Royal Museum. A telepathist also definitely lacks infiltration ability. Her family's influence is probably even greater than I expected. Thankfully, the verification didn't produce any strange phenomena. Otherwise, the only thing that can be done is to allow Miss Justice to act innocent and hand the card over to the higher authority. And this also means that I'm not fated to have this treasure. There's nothing in this world with 100% certainty." Amidst his thoughts, Klein heard Miss Justice's subsequent question. "Mr. Fool, exactly what secret lies in that bookmark?" "Well, if your adorer is unwilling to give you the answer, just pretend that I didn't ask. Of course, the secret is that it hides a card of blasphemy inside." Klein was overjoyed as he silently sighed. After thinking it over carefully, he decided to wait until he obtained the card of blasphemy before replying to Miss Justice. Otherwise, she might appear too shocked and act strangely, causing his own actions to be negatively affected. Klein was in no hurry to return to the real world. He just sat there in the silent, empty old palace, thinking about when to act and how to do it. Miss Justice has done some damage to that bookmark, so I wonder if someone would later discover the damage. Otherwise, would the bookmark slowly show signs of abnormality and attract attention? Thus, I cannot afford to delay or wait. It would be best if I take action tonight. As all sorts of ideas churned through his mind, Klein gradually came to a decision. Then, on the basis of his morning observations, he conjured the layout of the Royal Museum's first floor and the general conditions surrounding it. Looking at this blueprint, Klein began going through different plans and quickly established a relatively safe plan. Finally, he made another divination to confirm the degree of danger. After seeing that nothing had changed, he returned to the real world and began making all sorts of preparation. What Klein originally wanted to do was to draw the pattern in his memory, forge a similar bookmark, and replace it after he had sneaked in via responding to himself. He wanted to ensure that no one noticed or know for a long time that the bookmark had been stolen. By the time it was discovered, it would be too late for others to trace the incident back to him. However, after much deliberation, he felt that this wasn't good. As long as the fake bookmark was discovered, the most suspicious person would be Miss Justice, who touched the original bookmark today. I can't put Miss Justice at risk for the sake of a treasure. She did this to help me. Klein finally figured out how to keep Miss Justice from being suspected. His plan was to not only steal the bookmark, but to also steal the surrounding items as well, including some of the lighter books. After finishing his preparations, Klein took out his gold pocket watch and opened it. He patiently waited until after 9. He wanted to act before midnight. If he were too early, people living around there wouldn't have started sleeping. That wouldn't satisfy his requirement for taking action. If he were too late, there would be almost no pedestrians on the streets. Just walking along the streets would make him be easily suspected, and during this period of time, the whole of Backland was under tight curfews due to serial murders. This was beneficial to Klein's operation, but it was also disadvantageous. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The needle kept ticking. As the night deepened, the crimson moon appeared, and it was finally past 9. Putting the master key and other items in his pockets, he took his cane and first went to East Borough to change his attire. Then he rented a carriage several times until he reached a place quite far from King's Avenue in Westborough. By then, an hour and 45 minutes had already passed. His initial plan was actually nothing like this. He wanted to summon himself and respond to himself to become a spirit body. He wanted to rely on his extremely fast speed to cross the distance from Sherwood Borough to West Borough before infiltrating the Royal Museum. However, he eventually abandoned the plan because of the potentially high risks. Backland had more than one high-sequence beyond. In a situation where a serial killer caused everyone to panic, yet remained unsolved for such a long time, there might be high-sequence Beyonders who were consciously using their Beyonder powers or corresponding sealed artifacts to monitor certain areas. The distance from Sherwood Borough to West Borough was neither too long nor too short, and the probability of being discovered was substantial if such a special spirit flew like this. This cannot be completely written off just because the divination result says that the risk isn't high, but there is the existence of certain danger, because the divination doesn't give a direct answer, but a revelation that needs to be interpreted. In other words, the results of the risk isn't high, but there is the existence of certain danger, is built on the premise that I make a relatively good choice. Therefore, to be careful, Klein modified his original plan but retained the core idea. To King's Avenue, Royal Museum. There were 4 security guards standing on top of a polygonal roof. Dressed in thick robes, they were enduring the cold of the autumn night as they carefully monitored their respective directions. Once anyone approached the museum, even if they were hidden by the trees or building shadows, it would be difficult to hide from their eyes. From this arrangement alone, it could be seen that the security company that had been employed was very professional. There's still half an hour before our shift ends. A security guard looked down at his companions who were patrolling the building and shook his body. In the museum, the remaining security personnel were divided into 4 groups. They patrolled the various exhibition halls in intervals according to different routes. In the showroom where Roselle's diary was kept, the Machinery Hivemind Squad captain, Max Livermore, wore a monocle that allowed him to directly see wraiths, shadows, and other spirit-type monsters. He carried a lantern as he went back and forth to check on the area. Occasionally, he would head to the other halls to check on the situation. His 2 subordinates remained in the small hall, next to Roselle's diary. However, there was an additional item on the glass display case. It was a collection of brightly colored blocks that had been pieced together into a miniature layout of the museum's first floor. This was also a sealed artifact. As long as those blocks were pieced into the shape of a corresponding building, they would be able to establish a connection with the real building. Once anyone intruded, its surface would react immediately by shrinking. Of course, there were quite a few limitations to this. The distance couldn't be too far, and it wouldn't work if the number of blocks it had wasn't enough to piece together the building. And without external help, it was almost impossible for people or items inside to leave. Captain, do you really think someone will steal this notebook? I can't comprehend it at all. One of the team members asked in a bored tone when he saw Max coming back with his lantern. Max smiled and said, "Some people adore Roselle with zeal. It's not something you can understand. Some of them believe that they can crack it and only need more information for reference. Some of them believe that the symbols contain a mysterious power. As long as they can find the correct combination, they will gain Beyonder powers. In previous exhibitions, we would capture such criminals from time to time. So that's why we didn't hide the notebook away and place them in sealed areas. We are waiting for these people to surrender themselves." Another teammate asked with enlightenment. Max nodded and said, "Who wouldn't want free meritorious deeds?" 18 Kings Avenue. Outside a building next to a crossroad junction. Klein followed the shadows and shaded areas, using the master key from time to time to walk in a straight line before finally arriving. He took out the plain brass key, pointed it at the kitchen door, and turned it silently. An imperceptible rippling happened as Klein entered the room. All the way through, he saw doors and walls, and without disturbing anyone, he found a storage room. This master key is really useful. However, both of its previous owners lost themselves and entered dangerous spots. It makes me afraid of continuously carrying it, Klein sighed as he put away the brass key. With the room beside him being the servants' sleeping quarters, he took out holy night powder and released his spirituality to seal off the storage room, making any commotion from within impossible to leak out. Then he took out a candle and placed it on a crate in front of him. Puh! He snapped his finger and produced a light blue spirituality fire on his fingertip. After the candle wick was lit, he summoned himself using ritualistic magic and then responded to himself above the gray fog. Less than a minute later, Klein was floating in the room, facing his body whose eyes had lost their luster. After familiarizing himself with this feeling, he wrapped the ancient and exquisite Aztec copper whistle to stabilize his spirit body and made it stronger. It caused a chilly wind to begin to swirl in the room. At the same time, he also used this power to slightly change the appearance of his illusory spirit body, causing it to appear as if there was a layer of paint on its face. After doing all of this, Klein took a box of common matches he randomly bought off the streets, cut out a transparent door in the wall of spirituality, and headed out. Action time. He silently encouraged himself, and just like a real ghost, he passed through the residential buildings, one by one, before successfully arriving outside the Royal Museum. There was no need to activate his spirit vision. In this state, he could clearly see every security personnel, their aura, and emotions which unreservedly betrayed them. Finding the withered lawn and the iron-black lamppost that faced the hall window, Klein didn't swagger over just because ordinary people couldn't see him. Instead, he followed the shadows and took an elusive route. He passed through the sculpted tree and obstacles before cautiously arriving at his destination. He stuck close to the wall, as he couldn't guarantee that the security personnel didn't comprise of a member of the machinery hive. At this moment, the 4 security guards on the rooftop, who were carefully inspecting their respective areas of operations, were like blind people. They failed to discover anything. Klein didn't enter the exhibition hall directly, because his spiritual perception and intuition told him that the museum floor was shrouded in a mysterious power. It also had to do with how he couldn't confirm if there were Beyonders inside. He followed his plan and circled to another area, to the washroom that was closer to the exhibition hall that housed Roselle's diary. Then he threw the box of matches he had brought with him through the vent. Next, he flew up and entered the second floor. Appears in the exhibition hall where Roselle's diary was kept. The 2 machinery hivemind members suddenly heard a clatter. At the same time, they turned their heads to look at the sealed artifact made out of blocks above the glass display case. Inside the scaled-down model of the museum's first floor, there was a gray dot that was constantly flashing. There's a lifeless object in the nearest washroom. One of the team members made a definite judgment. The other team member relaxed a little, frowned, and said in a guessing tone, "A dead leaf blown in by the wind." "TD's possible." The team member who spoke first nodded. "Let's wait till the security guards pass by. We'll get them to check and confirm the situation." Captain told us to stay here and not to leave no matter what happens, especially not alone. In the event of an urgent emergency, they could evacuate with Roselle's notebook. All right. His companion had no objection to his suggestion. In the office area on the second floor of the museum, Klein was like a floating ghost, passing through one wall after another and flying directly above the restored study. However, he didn't fly too fast. Instead, he continued to sense the fire spark below and kept track of the distance. When the straight-line distance reached almost 30 meters, he lifted his illusory and translucent right hand and soundlessly snapped his finger. In the washroom on the first floor, the box of matches exploded with a soft bang. Then a scarlet flame leaped up and ignited a paper towel, a potted plant, and the wooden door. The flames didn't spread yet, but it was shocking enough. The nearby security personnel who heard the noise immediately rushed over. In the exhibition hall that was monitoring the entire situation on the first floor, the two Machinery Hivemind members also saw the flames in the model at the same time and subconsciously wanted to rush over there. This was not only an attempt to extinguish the fire, but they were also prepared to capture the troublemaker. But the moment they took 2 steps, they stopped, having remembered their captain's orders: don't leave this exhibition hall, don't leave Roselle's notebook, regardless of the situation. They looked at each other, then they looked warily at the 2 entrances to the hall before quietly taking out their own Beyonder weapons. As Beyonders of the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery, they were never lacking in equipment. At this moment, Max Livermore was patrolling the various exhibition halls on the first floor with a lantern in hand. He had also noticed the commotion and, without thinking, rushed towards the direction of the exhibition hall where Roselle's notebook was located. Priority to ensure the safety of the items was higher than capturing the intruder. Moreover, Max believed that no matter what the other party's intentions were, as long as they entered the first floor of the museum and entered any of the halls, they would be under the effect of the sealed artifact, and it wouldn't be easy to leave that easily. If there was no external help, the infiltrator would be trapped inside. Even if the intruder had a helper, it would still take them quite a bit of time to get rid of the effects. Once you enter, you will be like prey that has fallen into a trap. Max Livermore ran at top speed. After passing through many exhibition halls, he finally saw the silhouettes of his 2 companions. At that moment, Klein, who was on the second floor of the museum, had already passed through the doors and walls according to the layout in his memory. He had arrived right above the restored study. He was in no hurry to carry out any follow-up actions. Instead, he first looked down. As the stone floor was relatively thick, Klein was unable to vaguely confirm if there were any auras or emotions beneath. He could only spread his arms wide, fall forward, and silently lie on the ground. His illusory and transparent figure quickly faded into the ground. On the crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling on the first floor, a faintly discernible human face suddenly appeared. The strange face overlooked the exhibition hall, its eyes constantly moving, taking in the scenery of every corner in the area. There are no Beyonders or security personnel. Mumbling to himself, Klein penetrated the ceiling and descended in front of Roselle's glass-covered desk. He glanced at it, and without hesitation, he reached out with both hands to grab the bookmark in the manuscript of creativity and the bookmark which looked like child's graffiti. He was trying to prevent a powerful Beyonder, who could reconstruct the scene through magical means, from knowing that he knew which bookmark was abnormal. This was to prevent the investigator from suspecting Miss Justice, who had only touched one bookmark. Augmented by Azek's copper whistle, he passed through the glass case and steadily held the 2 bookmarks. Then he wrapped them within his spirit body. After finishing this step, Klein's heart calmed down, no longer having any obvious nervousness or tension. He stretched out his hands again, reaching out for the other bookmarks. Waya, waya, waya. The loud and shrill cry of a baby suddenly reverberated within the exhibition hall. It was so illusory, as though it came from far, far away. Klein's body stiffened, freezing all of a sudden like a lake encountering extreme coldness. In his spirit body state, he appeared to have been frozen. Waya, waya, waya. Along with the cries of the baby were fine black rifts that surrounded Klein like a discontinuous iron fence. In the blink of an eye, one of the black rifts cracked open, revealing an eyeball filled with blood strands. In the center of the eyeball was a deep pupil, and in it, countless tiny white worms were crawling and squirming. 1, 2, 3, black rifts opened successively, and one by one the bizarre eyeballs were exposed in midair. They stared at Klein in a cold and merciless manner. As they appeared, everything around them froze in place. Even the illusory spirits were unable to penetrate through them. It even became hard for Klein to sense the existence of the spirit world. He found it difficult to see the translucent figures that were located infinitely high. He found it hard to see the different colors, the lustrous splendors which contained various types of knowledge. Why did you only take the bookmarks? A soft but unemotional female voice entered Klein's ear. He froze on the spot and saw a tall bookcase, divided into 2 levels. The top level almost reached the ceiling, with a staircase and a passage surrounding countless books. At the top of the stairs sat a figure shrouded by the dark. The figure's feet, which wore black leather boots, hung from the wooden stairs as they were suspended in midair. I actually didn't sense her existence at all. Is she some powerhouse from the machinery hive? No, she might be a high-sequence Beyonder. Klein didn't answer. Instead, he narrowed his eyes. Why did you only take the bookmarks? Where did you learn to only take the bookmarks? The figure asked once more. The gentleness had a hint of sternness, and the bloodshot eyeballs surrounding him rapidly widened, as though they wanted to occupy the entire space. Before she could finish her sentence, Klein revealed a wide smile on his face. His illusory, nearly translucent figure instantly disappeared, leaving his whereabouts unknown. Even Azek's copper whistle and the 2 bookmarks which were wrapped in his spirit body had vanished. Above the gray fog, within the majestic ancient palace, Klein's figure suddenly appeared at the top of the long, mottled table. He leaned back into his chair and said with a chuckle, "Fortunately, I was prepared." The state of his spirit body wasn't part of his Beyonder powers. It didn't originate from the transformation between his physical body and spirit body. This was the result of him summoning himself and responding to his ritual. And the power of this ritual came from the mysterious space above the gray fog. It stemmed from its special nature. Hence, as long as Klein succeeded, he wouldn't even need to try to escape. By just ending the summoning directly, he would be able to return to the gray fog and from here, instantly return to his physical body in the real world. As the space above the gray fog could block the power of deities like the eternal blazing sun and the true creator, Klein believed that, without the interference of deities, the summoning wouldn't be interrupted. As long as the enemy didn't kill his spirit body or instantly knock him unconscious, Klein had the confidence to escape. This was also the reason why he didn't want to become a spirit body and still make a long trek over to the museum. The more time spent added even more variables. As the faint and dark crimson moonlight shone in from the window, the woman sitting at the top of the stairs between the bookshelves looked at the desk in silence. She looked at the spot where Klein had been. The surrounding cries of the baby and the eyeballs had disappeared one after another. After an unknown period of time, the top of the stairs suddenly became empty, as if no one had ever been there before. In the exhibition hall which housed Roselle's diary, Max Livermore said to his 2 team members, "Watch this place well. I'll go find the infiltrator. He must still be trapped somewhere on the first floor by the power of the sealed artifact." As he spoke, he looked at the sealed artifact, the model of the first floor of the museum, in a bid to find the red dot which represented the infiltrator and lock onto that person's location. However, no matter how he looked and counted, something didn't seem right. The number of people hadn't increased. Max Livermore froze where he was. 18 Kings Avenue, in a certain wealthy merchant's storage room. Klein's eyes lit up again, and the corners of his mouth curled up. He left the bookmarks and Azek's copper whistle above the gray fog, and he didn't waste time returning to his body. After extinguishing the candles and ending the ritual, Klein cleaned up the scene. He used a specially concocted medication to neutralize the smell of the holy night powder and the essential oils from the ritual. After doing all of this, he dispelled the wall of spirituality, allowing the wind to blow away the remaining traces. Next, he took out his master key, planning to go through buildings before taking a rental carriage a distance away. Using his cane to determine his direction to prevent himself from getting lost and heading back to the Royal Museum or to a particular cathedral, Klein headed off at a brisk pace, opening the walls and doors that stood in his way with the master key. After walking in a straight line for a while, he suddenly felt like he was unable to determine his position. 2 more buildings and I'll be out. If I'm no longer on King's Avenue, I'll get a rental carriage, or I'll make another divination. I'll immediately study the card of blasphemy once I'm home. Klein quickly made up his mind. He placed the brass key, which was simply shaped against the wall, and gently twisted it. As the formless ripples spread out, he arrived at a neighboring building of the terraces. At this moment, his nose twitched as he smelled a strong stench of blood. The strong smell of blood. Klein frowned. He looked up and saw a lady laid out in the living room ahead of him. The woman's expression was filled with pain. There was a large wound at her abdomen, and her internal organs seemed to have disappeared. At the same time, Klein heard grunting noises. Night the 12th case. That devil's serial murderer. The moment he saw the corpse and heard the sound, Klein's hair stood on end. He knew that he had encountered a bad situation. Within his line of sight, the living room's decorations were mostly brilliant yellow and bright. There was nothing unusual about the coffee table and sofa. Only the carpet was stained bright red with blood as it slowly soaked through. On the side of the wound on the female corpse's abdomen, which was completely empty, sat a large-sized black dog. Its mouth was half open, revealing many sharp white teeth that sent shivers. On each tooth, there were dark red marks like iron rust. This seemed to be the result of its prolonged consumption of flesh, without frequent brushing. At this moment, the large black dog's teeth were still wrapped around blood-red small intestines, as well as bits and pieces of raw meat. Its head turned over, and its eyes, which resembled magma, reflected Klein, who was dressed as a worker, and his disguised face. Grunt. The large black dog let out a roar which sounded like it was showing dominance. It really is an animal. It's a sequence 6 devil, a devil which is about to advance. And none of the preparations that I made today were for it. These few thoughts instantly flashed through Klein's mind. Suddenly, the black dog's body expanded rapidly, turning into a 2 to 3 meter tall monster. On its back, a pair of giant bat wings slowly spread open, and beside its ears, goat horns covered in mysterious patterns grew out. Red and blue flames leaped from its luxuriant fur as the strong smell of sulfur followed. Almost at the same time, Klein stomped on the ground. Instead of retreating, he advanced, swinging his cane as he shot out at the gigantic devil dog like a cannonball. Swing! The black devil dog quickly pounced forward. Its sharp claws created afterimages as it swiped at Klein's body. Without a sound, its claws had penetrated the figure, as if they were piercing through the air. Klein's figure became faint as it quickly turned transparent. It was just an illusion. It was an illusion created by Klein. At this moment, he had already rolled on the ground and closed in towards the oriel window. Then, with his left hand pressing down, his entire body flew into the air, directly smashing through the glass. After identifying the enemy, he made up his mind to escape. Upon seeing this, the eyes of the huge devil dog immediately lit up like magma, as if there was a raging fire inside. It opened its mouth, which emitted a putrid smell, and said a word filled with foulness, a word that came from the devil language, die. Oof! Klein's body suddenly stopped. His heart felt as if it was being tightly clenched by an invisible hand. The figure that was frozen in midair instantly became thin and dim, turning into a crudely cut paper figurine. And this paper figurine was covered with red rust. Smash! Clang! 2 sounds of indistinguishable order sounded. Klein's figure appeared again, smashing through the oriel window and pouncing towards the stone-paved street. The paper figurine substitute slowly floated down as it ignited and emitted the smell of sulfur. The devil dog let out a low growl and pounced again, jumping onto the windowsill. A crimson-blue fireball flew out from its mouth, blasting in the direction of its enemy's escape route. The moment Klein landed on the ground, he immediately followed up with another roll. The crimson-blue fireball smashed to his side, but it didn't explode immediately, as if it was being affected by an invisible force, as though it was being detained. Boom! Only after Klein had scrambled a distance away did the fireball expand and explode, shattering the surrounding stone pavements. Seeing that the devil dog was about to pursue him, Klein opened his mouth, having prepared for this. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "Murder! Save me! Murder! Save me!" His voice seemed to be augmented with special effect. It echoed far and wide through the silent night, waking the residents of the entire street and sending them into the ears of the patrollers who were 2 streets away. The giant devil dog paused in its pouncing posture. After thinking for a second, it retreated back into the room and began to clean up the scene. Klein's sprinting figure also disappeared under the shouts of "Murder!" and "Save me!" Inside a nearby fireplace that had long since been extinguished, the remnant charcoal suddenly reignited, and an exaggerated flame rose up. Klein seemed to be performing a magic trick as he appeared out of the flames. With a light leap, he held his cane and jumped out. Then he used the master key to open the door, tear through walls, and quickly escaped in another direction. Phew, at a time like this, a scream without Beyonder powers is much more useful than simulating gunshots. Klein sighed as he took out a bottle of amantha extract and dripped a few drops on himself. As the original race of the devil was of the dog species, he had to be wary of its scent-tracking abilities being one of its special powers. In this way, Klein continued on until he reached another cross-junction. Only then did he stop and look around. Seeing that it was relatively quiet and unaffected, he hurried to the side of the street and hired a rental carriage. It was only after the carriage had traveled a certain distance in the night when Klein finally heaved a breath of relief. He knew that the devil wouldn't catch up to him. This master key is really strange. I actually got lost and found myself at the scene of the murder. I have to be a lot more careful when using it in the future. That really was a devil transformed from an animal. Where did its potions and formulas come from? Does it have a human companion? How did it pick its target for the serial murder? What's gratifying is that after confirming this point, it will be much more difficult for it to commit crimes again, and the probability of getting caught will also greatly increase. All sorts of thoughts and questions appeared in Klein's mind as the carriage sped along the wide, deserted road which was lined with gas street lamps. Suddenly, Klein's heart skipped a beat, and an image naturally appeared in his mind. Vines drooped down from the sky and interweaved to form a dense forest. However, the carriage driver didn't seem to notice and continued to drive the carriage across the green vegetation. No good. Without hesitation, Klein lunged for the window, about to jump into the street. Bang! The carriage shook and he was flung backward. At the same time, those vines really drooped down. Klein frowned as he attempted to use flame controlling to ignite the carriage, but no sound came from his finger. At this moment, the surroundings had become abnormally quiet. Even the sounds of the horses' hooves trampling and the rapid rumbling of the wheels over the green vegetation had disappeared. Klein tried his best to calm himself down as he looked out the window and saw that the carriage had been driven into the air, following the road of vines. No, this isn't Backland, he narrowed his eyes. At this moment the carriage stopped. Outside the window, the vines had formed a hammock in the air. A pair of feet in black leather boots drooped down, and a gentle but emotionless voice entered Klein's ear. What were you doing? It's that woman inside the museum. She's suspected to be a high-sequence Beyonder. She doesn't seem to recognize me. After all, I had disguised myself with Azek's copper whistle. She must have heard the cry for help and came over to check. Klein's thoughts were abnormally active at that moment. He deliberately gulped and said, I'm a private detective. Many friends and Jay are investigating the recent serial murder. T have a mystical item called the master key. It can open doors and let me pass through walls, but it will cause the holder to get lost. TT was during this process that I ran into the scene of the crime. Because I wasn't the murderer's opponent, I could only shout for help while running. Everything I said was the truth, Klein silently added in his heart. After he finished speaking, there was temporarily no response from the outside. However, he felt that a gaze had penetrated the carriage, passed through the obstructions, and was directly inspecting the items on his body. Fortunately, I left Azek's copper whistle in the bookmarks above the gray fog just in case. At that moment, Klein was very glad. Caution and carefulness were indeed useful. After the indescribable and torturous silence, the gentle but emotionless female voice finally sounded again. That key has a certain curse. It must not be used unless absolutely necessary. As soon as she finished her sentence, the surroundings changed completely. Everything, the vines, the road through the forest, the road to the sky, had all disappeared. The carriage continued on the streets, driving between the elegant iron-black gas street lamps. Klein remained on tenterhooks until the carriage arrived near East Borough, where he paid the fare of 8 soldi. Under normal circumstances, a rental carriage wouldn't enter any of East Borough streets because it was likely to be robbed. In one of the rooms on Black Palm Street, Klein changed his clothes and went straight to sleep. He didn't attempt to return to Minsk Street before midnight. The 12th murder had just occurred, and it would only serve to make Backland's situation tenser. He didn't immediately go above the gray fog to study the secret of the bookmark. He acted just as he had described himself to the mysterious woman. He was a low-sequence Beyonder, a private investigator with some Beyonder power. Tonight's sure was filled with surprises. It was rather thrilling. All I did was steal something. Yes, most of the problems can be blamed on the master key. Klein made a self-deprecating comment and quickly fell asleep. The next morning, he breathed in the choking smog as he slowly strolled home and picked up the newspapers and letters from his mailbox. After opening the door, he casually flipped open the newspaper to take a look and found that the headline was as he had expected: the 12th case. The devil has appeared again. The police have declared that they have locked onto the murderer. As for the theft of the objects in the Royal Museum, it was only mentioned in an inconspicuous location. In fact, the article didn't even mention what the stolen object was. The unstamped letter that came with the newspaper was a water bill that Klein had to pay for himself. He glanced at it and casually threw it on the coffee table. He then returned to the second floor to heat up water for a bath. He waited until the water vapor filled the bathroom before he seized the opportunity to take 4 steps counterclockwise to enter the space above the gray fog. Inside the immutable ancient palace, Klein sat down and picked up the bookmark that depicted the figure of Emperor Roselle. It really wasn't easy getting you. He gently caressed the surface of the cardboard and silently sighed. Incantation. The bookmark was, on the surface, nothing special. Roselle's portraits had been placed everywhere around the exhibition hall, and the image depicted was from the period when he was middle-aged. Klein kept flipping the bookmark repeatedly, in scrutiny, and found a tiny puncture, thereby confirming that this was the bookmark which Miss Justice had verified. He tried to spread his spirituality, and he slowly injected it inside. However, just like with ordinary objects, his spirituality only flowed and failed to permeate it, nor did it cause any abnormal changes. That's right, Roselle had the intention of finding someone who was fated, so he wouldn't specifically restrict it to Beyonders. Klein thought for a moment, then said softly in Fasak, "Pirate King." The bookmark still didn't respond. He tried the words in ancient Fasak, Intis, Loan, and other languages again, but the result was the same. As for Jotun, Elvish, Dragonese, and other languages from the mysticism domain, Klein could only try them out of hope since they was overly restrictive and unlikely to be the language used. Without a doubt, he failed. Immediately following that, Klein used Fasak again as he translated, "One Piece." The bookmark lay quietly on his palm, showing no sign of abnormality. Klein tried the steps he did from before, using different languages again, but he was constantly met with failure. It seems that my initial guess was wrong. The young Roselle might have used the meme of Pirate King to make a joke, but he might not necessarily do that when he was older. People will ultimately grow old and change. Klein reflected over his mistake as he tapped the edge of the long, mottled table with his finger, trying hard to infer from the bits of information that the diary had provided to unlock the bookmark. After a while, he took out a pen and paper, and he wrote down his thought process so as to avoid any confusion or contradiction. While doing this, Roselle was definitely maniacal and in despair. It also clearly showcases his warped humor. The fated ones will receive it, is proof considering how it doesn't suit the world's lingo at present. Therefore, I can be certain that he really wanted someone to discover the uniqueness of the cards of blasphemy by chance. In that case, the unlocking method can't be too unimaginable, or something that will often appear in daily life. What Roselle required was a coincidence. For example, when someone holds the worthless bookmark and randomly says a specific word, then, congratulations, you have obtained a fortuitous opportunity. Yes, this is very in line with his warped humor. Going by this logical train of thought, different cards of blasphemy should have different unlocking incantations. Using a single term to unlock all the cards of blasphemy clearly isn't congruent with Roselle's style. What is the incantation for unlocking this card? Well, the first things that can be ruled out are the words that are commonly used, words that are said all the time. Also, when creating the cards of blasphemy, Roselle's state was in despair, maniacal, unwilling to part with it, reminiscent, struggling, and angry. I can try to immerse myself in that state of mind and imagine myself to be Roselle at that point in time. I can imagine what kind of incantation I would have used. Klein stopped writing and began acting as Roselle in a bid to find some inspiration. He first tried out vulgarities in different languages, including ancient Fasak, as well as terms pertaining to hope, but unfortunately was rewarded with failure. Immediately after, He tried to figure out what would be the last thing a desperate powerhouse would be reluctant to part. His wife Matilda. Such a licentious guy shouldn't have such deep feelings for his first wife. His children. The eldest daughter, Bernadette, the eldest son, Seal, and the second son, Bornova, according to the diary. The person he can't get over the most was his daughter, Bernadette, who might become an important figure in the mysterious world. Klein paused, took a breath, and prepared to try again. Bernadette, he said in the Inti's language. The bookmark didn't respond. Klein switched to the languages of Lone, Highlander, and Fasak, but still failed to achieve the desired results. He sighed and said with a deep voice which corresponded to ancient Fasak, Bernadette. This name echoed in the empty and quiet gray fog like it was nothing special. Just as Klein was about to search for new inspiration, he suddenly felt the bookmark in his hand sink. It immediately turned into an invisible whirlpool, which wildly absorbed Klein's mental energy. For an ordinary person, this was a huge burden, but for a Sequence 7 magician, it wasn't especially draining. Klein easily survived this hurdle and couldn't conceal his joy as he looked at the object in his palm. A bright light emitted, bit by bit, from the bookmark, and the image of Emperor Roselle on the outside was being replaced by an entirely new image. He was sitting on an ancient stone throne, as he wore a black crown embedded with various precious stones on his head. He wore pitch-black armor, and a cape of the same color was draped over his body. He held a scepter, and he looked forward with cold, aloof eyes. On the upper left corner of the bookmark, there was a line of text condensed from the bright radiance of star. Sequence 0, Dark Emperor. Sequence 0. Indeed, the secrets of the gods are hidden within. The Dark Emperor is actually Sequence 0, Klein thought with a smile, half sighing and half surprised. Soon after, the bookmark became three-dimensional, like a miniature book. The book moved without the wind, revealing a Roselle in a white hood. Beside it was a corresponding description in ancient Fasak. Sequence 9, Lawyer. Good at discovering and using loopholes in the rules and the weaknesses of their opponents. Possesses excellent eloquence and reasoning skills. Potion formula. Klein glanced at the formula ingredients but didn't look carefully. He reached out his hand and touched it, making the book flip to the next page. Sequence 8, Barbarian. Problems that cannot be solved by the law will be solved by force. This is also one of the rules. The Beyonders at this sequence have a high resistance to psychological influences. Potion formula. As Klein touched it, the book conjured from the card of blasphemy flipped through one page at a time. Sequence 7, Briber. Sequence 6, Baron of Corruption. Sequence 5, Mentor of Confusion. Sequence 4, Count of the Fallen. Sequence 3, Frenzied Maid. Sequence 2, Duke of Entropy. Sequence 1, Prince of Disorder. Sequence 0, Dark Emperor. After skimming through the book, Klein couldn't help but sigh. This really hides the profound secrets of becoming a god. It's no wonder all of the high-sequence Beyonders who tread this pathway will attempt to establish their own kingdoms and walk the land. It's because the ritual of becoming a god requires it. To advance from Sequence 1, the Prince of Disorder, to Dark Emperor, the necessary ritual requires one to possess their own country, linking their name to the title of emperor, making it common knowledge among the populace. Furthermore, one needed to establish a set of strict and complicated rules that defied normality, including architectural style. Then they would spur on their citizens to secretly establish 9 mausoleums that were similar to pyramids, after which they would enter one of the mausoleums. With a large majority of the citizens who would be scattered across different cities in corresponding sacrificial rituals involved, the Prince of Disorder would imbibe the Sequence 9 potion. Once the advancement was successful, the Dark Emperor wouldn't truly die until all the 9 secret mausoleums were destroyed. Even if he was annihilated, he would still be able to awaken and return from one of the mausoleums. What was even more terrifying was that even if the deity was successfully killed and all 9 mausoleums destroyed, as long as a certain amount of the order set up by that deity remained, it was still possible for him to mysteriously revive. It appeared to be a loophole against death. The best way to completely obliterate him was for a new Dark Emperor to appear. This is a deity. Mortals cannot fight against deities, same for angels. Those who have yet to become deities will never be able to fathom the power of deities. Roselle exposited with deep implications at the end. In addition, Klein also knew one thing. Once there was a true god with a Sequence 0, it was impossible for a Sequence 1 Beyonder to appear. If there was no Sequence 0, Then, in the same way, there would be at most 3 sequence 1 Beyonder. This was a result of the law of Beyonder characteristics indestructibility and conservation. According to the Dark Emperor card of Blasphemy's description of the 10 sequences, Klein could clearly see that the greatest feature of this pathway was the shadow of it gradually evolving into order. Roselle also mentioned that if one had that card of Blasphemy in hand after advancing to a high-sequence Beyonder, the card would have a subtle reaction to the Beyonder ingredients that the person needed. Of course, it was limited to high-sequence Beyonders of the Dark Emperor pathway. What a pity, this is of no use to me. Klein looked at the card of Blasphemy thin down again, turning back into a poker card. However, it was no longer in disguise. On the surface, it depicted Roselle sitting on a stone throne, sequence 0 Dark Emperor. Klein remained silent for a few seconds before he sighed silently. This card's biggest use to me is to exchange the formulas for the items I need. There's also some information about deities and sequences. Apart from that, there's almost no other use for it. At the very least, as the leader of the Tarot Club and as the Fool, I will no longer be an empty shell. I now hold one path of the divine, and it's not like I can't produce a high-sequence Beyonder formula anymore. Yes, I remember that at the Beyonder gathering organized by old Mr. Eye of Wisdom, the lady who is suspected to have an artisan backing her has been always seeking to purchase the potion formula of Barbarian. As his mind whirled, Klein took another look at the Roselle portrait on the Dark Emperor card and couldn't help laughing. He has made every sequence in his own image. What a narcissist. I'm suddenly very curious what the card of Blasphemy for the Demoness pathway would look like. Reining in his thoughts, Klein destroyed the other bookmark he had casually picked up and discovered that it was just an ordinary bookmark. After doing all of this, he changed his seating posture and leaned back into his chair. He responded to Miss Justice's plea from last night and said calmly, "That was a card of Blasphemy made by Roselle." Adora Empress Burrow, Count Hall's home dining room. As per usual tradition, Audrey was saying grace with her father, mother, and elder brother before dinner. Praise the goddess. She tapped her chest in 4 spots in a clockwise manner to end the prayer. However, before she finished speaking, her vision was covered by a thick gray fog. A distant figure that seemed to be looking down at everyone, and everything opened his mouth with dominance. That was a card of Blasphemy made by Roselle. Mr. Fool, card of Blasphemy. Audrey, who finally received a response, was joyful at first, but then she fell into a daze. She couldn't understand what the so-called card of Blasphemy referred to. However, she quickly made a guess. She had always known that Emperor Roselle had made a secret deck of cards, representing some unknown force, which had 22 cards in total. It was believed to have been referenced from tarot cards. Furthermore, she had also heard from the Hanged Man that the secret to the deck of cards was that they hid the paths of the divine, the path to becoming a god. So it's called a card of blasphemy. It corresponds to the blasphemy slate. This is definitely a treasure of the highest level in the mysterious world. The paths of the divine. It's no wonder that Mr. Fool's adorer had to ask for help. He wanted to ensure that the card was the real one before taking action. It was to prevent a mistake from happening. Instead of getting the right target, it might end up informing the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery that a particular bookmark hides a card of blasphemy. I wonder if he succeeded. The Beyonders from the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery haven't come to make any routine inquiry. Perhaps he's still making plans. As her body trembled faintly, Audrey once again saw a figure praying inside the thick fog, an extremely blurry figure. He was saying respectfully, "The great fool, please convey my gratitude to the authenticator." This allowed my operation to go smoothly. For that, I'm willing to raise the reward to £3,000, which can be deducted from the £5,000 that haven't been paid yet. This is the share that the other party deserved. He succeeded. He succeeded just like that. But when I looked at the front pages of those newspapers, there was no news of the theft at the exhibition. It was all news of the 12th victim of the serial murder. Raising the reward to £3,000 implies that Mr. Fool's adorer had indeed succeeded in retrieving the bookmark containing the card of blasphemy without anyone noticing. How cool! Although the term invented by Emperor Roselle may not be elegant, reserved, or in line with my identity as a noble identity, it's the only impression that I feel right now. Our tarot club now has a complete path of the divine in its control. It should be a complete one, right? I wonder which one it is. But regardless, this represents the path to becoming a god. Under the glory of Mr. Fool, we will one day become the most powerful hidden faction in the world. I wonder if the other bookmarks hide cards of blasphemy. Audrey controlled her excitement as she felt longing and pride. She allowed the dining maid to help her spread out a napkin before her gaze shifted to Count Hall, who habitually read the newspapers while having breakfast. "Father, is there anything worth paying attention to today?" Count Hall sighed and said, "That devil has killed another innocent person. It's the 12th case. She's a fashion designer who had just become famous. She had only been a street girl a few times due to her desperate need for money, but she ended up encountering such a terrible situation. Thankfully, there was an eyewitness. The person witnessed the devil at the crime scene. He was really scared out of his wits. He constantly shouted on the streets, 'Murder' and 'Save me.' Yeah. I have to say that his cries for help did bring acceptable results. The devil didn't chase after him. As a result, the police have locked onto the suspect and are hunting him down." Audrey drew the crimson moon on her chest once again and said, "May their operation succeed." "Father, from what you just said, it sure was a horrible but funny scene. T hope that eyewitness won't have nightmares because of it." And on the same night, Mr. Fool's adorer took one of the cards of blasphemy from the heavily protected museum without alerting anyone. Audrey added wistfully in her mind and filled in some of the details herself. "Royal Museum, in the restored study. Are you sure that only 2 bookmarks were stolen?" The Machinery Hivemind Squad's Captain Max Livermore asked his team member. As he spoke, he stole a glance at the important figure standing in front of the desk with his back facing him. It was an old man wearing a white clerical robe and a clerical cap. He was the head of the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery for the Backland Diocese. He was a member of the Divine Council, Archbishop Hiramic Haydn. This important figure wasn't only a clergyman, but he was also a very famous scientist, a distinguished professor of physics at Backland University. Yes, only 2 bookmarks were stolen, the team member being questioned answered with certainty. Max nodded slightly and looked at Hiramic Haydn. After some thought, he deliberated and asked, "Your Excellency, after the closing of the museum yesterday evening, some aristocratic children came to visit. They had touched parts of the exhibited items, including one of the 2 bookmarks that were stolen. Do I need to get them to cooperate with the investigation?" "T know about that." Hiramic's hands naturally drooped down as he turned around and said in a calm tone, "I've already confirmed that those aristocratic children are not related to the thief who stole the bookmarks, so there's no need to get them to cooperate with the investigation." "Yes, Your Excellency." Max himself didn't think there was anything wrong with the aristocratic children, not to mention that Archbishop Haydn had enough mysticism knowledge and Beyonder techniques to confirm it. Hiramic's gentle and benevolent face didn't show the slightest trace of anger. He looked around and said, "There was more than one person here last night, at least 2 of them. They were divided into 2 opposing groups. One of them might even be of a higher sequence than me, while the other had somehow escaped mysteriously. Although I'm unable to reconstruct the entire scene, there are still some things that I can see. This matter is more complicated than we thought." At this point he sighed. "T also know why they wanted to steal the bookmarks. We've been tricked by Roselle for more than 150 years. Giving up £3,000 sure does hurts. I've saved up for so long and yet, I have less than £1,000. However, the card of blasphemy is a priceless treasure that cannot be exchanged, even with money. The contribution Miss Justice had made in this matter is definitely worth the price. Thankfully, I could deduct it from what she owes me, lightening my burden. If I ever meet Mr. Azek in the future, I'll pay him the £15,000 that belong to the adorer, with a high-sequence Beyonder formula. I wonder what the other cards of blasphemy were disguised to look like. According to the personality of the Emperor, they should all be rather surprising." After Klein finished his reply and looked out the palace at the sea of gray fog, he silently sighed. As a precaution, he temporarily left his dark Emperor card above the gray fog, on the surface of the long bronze table facing the seat of the Fool. He did so for Azek's copper whistle as well. When he returned to the real world, he held a ritual again and summoned himself to throw the master key, a sealed artifact which was an amalgamation of getting lost and having bad luck, above the gray fog. Although it didn't seem to have huge negative effects, it was enough to cause one to encounter life-threatening situations. He planned not to use it unless necessary. The master key is just a relic of an unlucky fellow who had just advanced to sequence 9. Yet it has a negative influence that even a mid-sequence Beyonder is unable to weaken. It seems like there's an additional factor in the reason why the apprentice lost control, which led to something abnormal. Now that I think about it, my previous decision was correct. To explore 32 Verde Street south of the bridge, I need to be careful and be prepared. Yes, I need to be aware of something. Sealed artifacts effects might not be completely related to the owner's sequence. I have to consider multiple factors, such as whether or not it has been contaminated by an evil god. Klein took a bath with the water that had already turned cold before walking out of the bathroom, refreshed. He went downstairs to enjoy the corn pancakes he had bought on his way back. They were local delights of the Potter Klein's Highlands, crispy, fragrant, and sweet. After he had eaten his fill, he went through his experiences from last night to see if he had left any clues behind. Even with the master key, if I'm not a Beyonder, it's impossible for me to escape from the hands of a devil. Back then, the mysterious and powerful lady must have determined that I wasn't an ordinary private detective. I also didn't have any intention of hiding that point. By not capturing me, this implies that she's either an official Beyonder who is friendly to wild Beyonders, or she's not a member of the 3 churches or the military. Yes, I'm more inclined with the latter point. The former point would most likely have her confiscate the master key. Say back then, I was almost on the brink of despair. I thought I would be detained in the underground prison of the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery, like ordinary Beyond. I even began considering my prison break. Who would have known that she would just leave? Which organization is she from? Or is she wild? No, for wild Beyonders to reach her level of power, they must have an organization of their own. That devil dog would definitely use its Beyonder powers to erase clues related to itself, and that naturally includes me. In the field of mysticism, there is no way to separate them, and that lady probably can't be exposed as well. From the looks of it, the clues that I left behind while escaping had most likely have been interfered with. As for what happened in the museum, they will be searching for a special spirit body, a strange existence, and what has that got to do with me, Sherlock Moriarty? Klein mocked himself as his heart grew calmer. Of course, he had dared to return home because he had divined it in advance. It was just like he was unafraid that the museum contained traps that he found completely unsolvable. Phew, this matter has come to an end. What should I do today? Practice my Beyonder powers and go to the Quelog Club to scrounge a meal in passing. Well, I don't know if the Nighthawks and mandated punishers have identified the murderer or not. Why don't I write another letter to Isengard Stanton and give myself a hint? As his thoughts raced, Klein heard someone from outside approach before leaving. Another letter. He opened the door in puzzlement, and indeed, he saw a letter lying in his mailbox. The letter was from Isengard Stanton. Teacher's problem when he returned to the living room. Klein picked up a letter opener and opened the envelope before taking out Isengard Stanton's letter. The famous detective wrote, "Your idea has greatly helped us. Please allow me to thank you here first. After receiving your letter, we immediately organized some people to sweep through crucial areas. As expected, we found some clues, and quite a few stray animals that had frequently appeared and were remembered by the residents had disappeared. In the process, we also noticed an interesting thing. 4 years ago, in the serial murder case, yes, the targets were single prostitutes with a child. Quite a few people living near the scene of the crime had mentioned that, although the most suspicious teenager was eccentric and vicious, he was quite fond of animals, especially a large black dog. After the boy died in the gang firefight, the people who lived around him never saw the dog again. I'm curious, who is its current owner? Was it the murderer of some unsolved serial murder case from even further back? The above facts have all been proven to be true at the scene of the 12th murder case, and it has played a key role in giving the police a preliminary idea of the suspect. If all goes well and the culprit is arrested, we will be able to get the majority of the reward money. My friend, I clearly remember your contribution. I will not forget your share. Isengard Stanton seems to suspect that I knew the truth about the devil, so he had deliberately hinted at something." Klein put down the letter and mumbled silently. However, this letter also made him feel relieved. The official Beyonders weren't looking for the wrong person. If the gigantic devil dog didn't receive any additional help, then it was only a matter of time before it was caught and killed. As for Isengard Stanton's prediction that there was another master, Klein didn't have enough evidence to confirm the matter, so it could only be said that there was a certain probability. In short, my mission ends here. The job is now left to the Nighthawks, mandated Punishers, and Machinery Hivemind Squad. Klein pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, picked up a fountain pen, and replied Isengard Stanton with a letter filled with humility. He also ignored his subtle hints like a real, ordinary private detective. After cutting another paper figurine and sending the letter, Klein strolled to the public carriage stop to wait. He thought in a relaxed manner. The next thing to do is wait for the money. Leopard said he would be visiting the Roselle Memorial Exhibition for 3 days straight. I'll have to wait until Saturday before visiting to find him and make the final payment. Hopefully, the patent for the bicycle will be filed by then. The Backland Patent Office seems to be known for its inefficiency. Klein had already made plans for the day. Since there was no Beyonder gathering, resulting in him being unable to buy the appropriate items, he suddenly had a lot of free time. He didn't need to busy himself for a short period of time. In the morning, I'll go to the Quelog Club, practice my marksmanship, practice my Beyonder powers, have lunch there, and then find a better circus to observe the magician's performance and see if I can get some inspiration. He took out his golden pocket watch and looked at it. He boarded the public carriage in a good mood. Hillstonborough Quelag Club. Since Klein came by at least twice a week, the attendants remembered him and didn't require him to show his proof of membership or his Frost Constellation badge. It was Wednesday morning, and since most of the Quelog Club's members belonged to the middle class, where they still had fixed and decent jobs, it was difficult for them to visit the club unless it was Sunday, tea time, or when they took time off from work. The spacious and bright hall seemed abnormally empty. There were only a few people sitting in the corner, where the coffee tables and sofas were. Glancing around, Klein spotted an acquaintance and went up to greet him. "Talum, with such terrific weather today, you should be at the Turf Club." The acquaintance was Talum, the aristocratic equestrian teacher who had introduced him to the club at the request of Mrs. Mary Dumont. He had once brought Klein business, the protection of Daily Observer reporter Mike Joseph on his trip to the Golden Rose for investigation. Talum looked up, touched his short brown curls, and smiled. "Oh my, it's the Honorable Great Detective. What have you been up to? I haven't seen you in a long time." "That's because you haven't been to the club for days." Klein smiled as he sat on the sofa next to Talum. "Tia been helping the police with a serial murder case. Although it might not necessarily yield any results, the reward is tempting enough. Besides, establishing good relations with the police is very important for us private investigators. What I just said was bragging. I'm just an unremarkable character who'd been summoned," he mocked himself inwardly. Among the few members sitting in the same sofa area behind them, a man who appeared to be a stockbroker initiated a discussion on the latest Western Railway shares and East Balham Plantation share. Talum didn't doubt Klein's answer. He chuckled and said, "This is indeed something that will busy a great detective." After exchanging a few pleasantries, he gradually entered a pensive state. Just as Klein was about to bid him farewell and leave for the underground shooting range, Talum suddenly looked at him and said, "Mr. Moriarty, may I ask you a question?" You can charge me a consultation fee. This one is free. Also, just call me Sherlock." Klein laughed. Talum nodded gently and said hesitantly, "I have a friend who has fallen in love with someone he shouldn't have. How should he deal with such a situation?" Although I had always believed that anyone who asks a question prefaced with, "I have a friend," basically means I myself, Talum's emotional colors implies that it's not for himself. He's in a dilemma, but I can't see any traces of pain. After activating his spirit vision, Klein leaned back slightly, clasped his hands, and said, "I'm sorry, but I'm not a psychiatrist or any of the experts in the newspapers or magazines who are good at solving emotional problems. My only advice is not to break the law." Heh, that was a joke. "First, we need to understand how this shouldn't have arose. Is there a feud between the family?" Talum glanced at him and said in resignation, "No, this isn't Romeo and Juliet." Upon hearing Talum's reply, Klein seemed to hear an illusory murmur in his ear. "Author Roselle Gustev, author Roselle Gustev, author Roselle Gustev," shaking his head, he apologized to Shakespeare and smiled. "This piece of work by Emperor Roselle is just too classic. When it comes to love that shouldn't be, I can't help but think of it. Then why shouldn't they be together?" Talum fell silent for a few seconds before saying, I have to keep it confidential. I'm sorry, just pretend I didn't ask. Confidential. That must be someone with certain standing, in love with someone of the same sex, in love with someone who is related by blood. Klein held back his curiosity and said with his hands spread out, then I can only give you one more suggestion. Read bestsellers about passionate love like Stormwind Mountain Villa and Love and Jealousy. Talum quivered his lips a few times, sighed, and said, Sigh, that can only be used as the last resort. In my opinion, the feelings present in those best-selling novels simply don't seem to occur among normal people. T thinks so too. Klein echoed in full agreement. After exchanging a smile with Talum, he got up and went to the underground shooting range to practice his shooting and bay under power. When it was almost noon, he returned to the first floor and went straight to the buffet cafeteria. He had noticed earlier that the cuisine that was in limited supply today was red wine fried foie gras, paired with sliced apples and bread soaked in butter. After taking his food, Klein carried his tray to the table where Talum was sitting. At that moment, there was another acquaintance of his, who, by the same token, had recommended his membership. He was the surgeon Aaron Series. Before he could sit down after setting the tray down, Klein noticed a crutch leaning against the chair of the famous surgeon. Aaron, what's wrong? He asked with concern. The tall and thin man wore a pair of gold-rimmed glasses and had a cold appearance. He lightly patted his right leg and said, No, don't mention it. It's really bad luck. I fell down the stairs and suffered rather serious fractures, so I could only fix it with a plaster. You really were unlucky. Klein sighed in agreement, cut a piece of foie gras, dipped it in sauce, and put it in his mouth. A fragrance that was emitted the moment they melted in his mouth stimulated all of his taste buds. You've been out of luck for a long time. Aaron nudged his spectacle frames and rubbed his temples in passing. He then looked at Klein, then at Talum before asking hesitantly, Mr. Moriarty, do you? What? Klein looked up. Aaron lowered his voice. You're a famous detective. You should know a lot of people, right? It's quite all right. Klein didn't understand what Aaron was up to as he answered perfunctorily. Aaron looked at Talum again and took a deep breath. Do you know anyone who's like a village witch doctor? No, I mean, some of the more capable fortune-tellers or mysticism enthusiasts. I feel that my recent string of bad luck is too abnormal. Know it's likely to be a fake or a scam, but there's no other way of shirking my bad luck. I've tried to go to church, praying, donating, attending mass, but it didn't work at all. Capable fortune-teller and mysticism enthusiast, you seem to be talking about me, Klein pondered and said, Aaron, tell us in detail about what happened to you. By his side, Talum nodded as well. Don't worry, I may be a believer of the Lord, but I don't reject things regarding mysticism. Aaron sighed in distress. There are a lot of things. For example, making mistakes at the operating table. Encountering an accident on the steam locomotive. I found that my house had been burgled when I returned home. When I went to the hospital, I ended up falling down the stairs. Do you think someone has cursed me? Yes, I've heard Aaron mention something like this before. Klein frowned slightly. As a former Nighthawk, it was easy for him to associate this description with a sealed artifact, misfortune cloth puppet. Could it be a similar item? He activated his spirit vision and asked seriously, Aaron, think back carefully. Before those unfortunate events began happening, one after another, did you or your family, yes, your family, encounter any unfortunate events?